quicker than it should have. So, you know, obviously there's quite a bit of damage on some of the sills as well. I think there's two that's extensively damaged. Those two would need to be replaced. There's a few others that probably could be just repaired pretty easily. Yeah, but as far as the towers go, my suggestion would be a full repoint, not just a tuck point. That's actually where you take all the, not all the mortar, but 3/4 of an inch roughly through all of the mortar joints and repoint them with new color matching mortar. There's also a lot of brick you'll see, not necessarily on this side, but on the opposing sides, there's quite a few bricks that have a lot of spalling and pretty significant damage. So those would be replaced, obviously. There's even some roof damage. I don't know if you guys saw that there on the corner. Might be able to see it here. Yeah.
The bottom right.
Yeah.
The discoloration of the pointing, we should be fixing that.
Yeah, so that would all have new mortar. So the entire thing would be repointed. So it would be all.
On the lower part?
Yep, on the towers, yeah.
I mean the main building?
So the main building is about 50%, but the plan is to do an acid etch wash, which would hopefully kind of mend the colors back together and kind of give you a monotone. You know, it wouldn't necessarily fix some of the colors that are way off from the last guy, but our colors would match the original. But the acid washing would help kind of dull the differences down. You know, obviously you see some of the discoloration there. You know, that stuff would all be taken care of as well with the wash process. We do have, we plan on pressure washing. Of course, that's important before you seal. If we have any rough areas, like in that corner, for instance, we can attach a media blaster to our pressure washer, which would actually remove that as well.
Hey, Brett, what do you think is going on there with that discoloration on the corner? Is that effervescent water getting?
There's a lot of efflow. Yeah, there's a lot of efflow there. And basically, you know, that's just kind of the calcium deposit. So as water travels through the mortar, it kind of pulls the line back out with it, and then it resolidifies on the surface, leaving you that kind of white powdery dust, basically. You know, some of the darker stuff obviously could just be, you know, mold and mildew. And, you know, the louvers, you know, those could obviously use some repainting. And, you know, you're going through the expense of having a tall lift there, which, you know, getting up there is obviously your biggest expense. If you're there, you might as well address those things. Yeah, so you can see a lot of the mortar in some of those areas have actually, it's fallen out. Yeah.
Wow.
So if you go to the inside, you're on the inside of the towers, I got a couple still shots in there later on in the video, but you know, they plastered on the inside of the walls, on the inside of the towers, those upper parts, which isn't terrible, except the fact that the outside wasn't sealed. So when water would, you know, make its way through that outer layer of brick, it would get trapped in between that plaster and the brick, which of course then would cause deterioration, because brick in itself is not designed to be submerged. So a lot of efflow throughout everywhere, pretty much. I mean, there are some areas, obviously, you could get away without doing repointing, tuck pointing, but I just feel that if you're going to get up there, it would make a lot more sense just to go through the towers and do them 100% so you know they're where they need to be. You know, you'd hate to go through the time and the effort, set up, get up there, and only tackle what you visually see as an issue right now. And then, you know, 2 years later, you see mortar falling out of joints that you didn't address. Because nobody can really tell for sure. You know, I mean, you can tap on it and know if it's loose maybe a little bit, but there's no real way to know, you know, what kind of longevity you have on the stuff that you don't replace. You can see some of the spalling on the left side of the one louver there. You know, moisture gets in and freezes and it pops the face off of the brick. A lot of mortar missing on the right side there. just a hairline crack, some moisture and freezing and pop. That's something that we could sculpt back in there and then color it to match. And a lot of that stuff that, even though it's not specifically mentioned in there, that's stuff that we will do. You can see a lot of color variation there. I'm not sure even that set of tuck pointing, there's a couple different colors in it for some reason. I'm not quite sure how they manage that. But we have been proactive a little bit. We have located some brick. We feel that it would be a good match. So the color variation wouldn't be off very far. It's from a school that dates back to about the same period of construction as this church. Caulking, glazing, that sort of thing. Again, you have the lifts there. The effort to just do it while you're there is a lot easier than, of course, remobilizing later to do it. So a lot of that stuff is, figured into our quote. See, this is a large section, obviously it did, but you can still see some of the patches where it's already deteriorated.
Are you looking at any of the caulking work around the windows and stuff there?
That's all inclusive in the quote as well. Yeah. I just don't feel like it makes sense. Like I said, if you're going to have the lifts and you're going to be there, it doesn't take a whole lot just to do it while you're there. Painting and caulking. I didn't figure for any of this stuff at grade, as far as windows at grade and doors at grade. I just feel you probably can get that done pretty reasonably locally, but everything that would need to be done, accessed by a lift, obviously we would finish out the windows. If we started this one up there, we would finish it out. But if there's any doors at ground level,
Right, no.
yeah.
Yeah.
You can see just a lot of deterioration. And some of that stuff's not very old. Think about the process. It's not very complicated. It's just very tedious, and there's things you do to make sure that you don't have failures. Obviously managing the water content of the mortar is also an important aspect. If you have guys that aren't super familiar with what they're doing, versus, like I said, we have actual masons that will be doing the work. The consistency of the mortar, the moisture content of the mortar can cause early failures if it's not being mixed properly. The higher the water content when applying the mortar, the weaker it is when it cures out. So again, a lot of spalling there on that one face you can see, as well as in the corner.
Do you guys use a wall may or something to test the condition of the mortar, or just by experience?
No, most of the water's all measured out, and it's just done by manufacturer. So we use a lot of Lycon mix, so it's a spec mix, and then, we go by their dosage rates. And if there's higher temperatures, depending on the time of year, you might want to use a water reducer, retarder. There's a lot of different things that, come into play depending on the weather conditions. It's not a one size fits all, just mix it up and slap it in. That's where, having some experience makes a huge difference. I don't know if the rest of you heard, but we were talking. So two of my masons, the one mason, he's got over 30 years experience. The other guy's got 15 years, and the apprentice has 10 years. and the one is a master mason. And they are also employees of the company. They're not subcontractors as well. You know, the foundation itself, you know, my background is I'm a foundation repair contractor. I've been fixing foundations for a really long time. I don't see anything structurally there. This building's in great structural shape. Most of this is, you know, for the most part cosmetic, and we're trying to prevent anything from becoming a structural issue, especially on the towers. There's a lot of water getting in on those towers right now, which of course does damage the structure and ultimately could cause some damage that wouldn't be able to be reversed. So the towers, of course, are the, you know, the most critical component of this project by far. I think I only found one structural crack, and it was very, very minor, and that would get a structural epoxy injection, but it's very, very minor.
There's been some discussion of splitting the job between the towers and the main parts of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just, you know, have you heard of that? Have I told you that?
You know, I haven't, but, you know, obviously the towers are kind of a thing of itself, you know, with having the need for the lifts. Most of the church can be accessible using, you know, traditional scaffolding. There's obviously some gables that, you know, we would need a lift, but we wouldn't need, you know, there's some spots on the south side we would need a 120-foot lift for versus an 80-foot lift on the rest of it. But we could get away with a lot smaller lift on the main building. So from a cost point of view, if you split them, it wouldn't make a whole lot of difference. In fact, I don't really see it making any difference. But I would caution postponing it too long.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because you don't want to get into a situation where.
Then sort of, we would do the towers this year and the main part of the building next year.
Sure.
We're going to support others, and we're going to bring this to a committee and then to the congregation. So we'll try to go about it in an organized fashion.
Sure. So most of the rope joints are in pretty decent shape, but there's some that need to be redone. And of course, that's inclusive on the main building portion of the repointing and tuck pointing. But you can see where the limestone foundation and the bricks start, all of that needs to be, you know, for sure replaced. That's really the only structural crack that I found. And again, that's just a simple epoxy injection. It's nothing major.
If anybody else wants to talk, they're having troubles hearing that, so. Oh. If anybody else wants to talk, we'll just pass the mic.
So this is the inside. You know, obviously those brick need to be pulled out and replaced. You know, again, that shell, it doesn't hurt anything as long as the water's not penetrating through that outer shell. If the water is allowed to come through, then it's a problem because it traps that moisture. And of course, the brick's not designed to be submerged and be under contact with constant moisture. So as long as the outside's sealed, there's really nothing that has to be done with that inner shell other than just the areas that are really damaged should be repaired.
With respect to that, how would you go about doing that? How much of that barge coat would you have to move in there?
Well, so it's basically most of the damage is kind of localized around the edges of the windows. So we would remove the shell where obviously there's some structural repairs that need to happen, but you know, pulling off that shell in areas that you don't necessarily need to could cause, you know, more damage and cause more harm than good, and then you're kind of opening a can of worms. So because there's going to be some bonding between that shell and of course the face of that brick. So you go and try to mechanically remove it, you could potentially pull the face off of that brick. So I feel leave it alone, prevent the moisture from coming from the outside in, which would prevent any other damage from happening, but then address the issues that you can see. But if you go to peel that off, it's kind of like peeling a scab, right? I mean, you could potentially cause more harm than good. So, and it doesn't hurt anything. The only reason it's causing the issue now is just because the outside's not sealed.
And so when you replace the masonry units up there, will you then parge coat over the top of the new masonry?
We don't have to. I mean, we certainly can if that's something you want. I mean, it doesn't take any effort whatsoever, but it's not a necessary component. You know, from, you know, an insulation factor or anything like that, it doesn't provide anything. You know, as a whole, the shell kind of does add some structural integrity to that area. But the little bit that needs to be repaired, I don't know that it would make much sense to go and plaster back over that. Does that kind of make sense?
Well, I'm just thinking that, I know the majority of the moisture would be coming from the outside, but if there's anything in the tower, I think you'd want to seal that parge coat back up so it's like a continuous membrane.
Sure, yeah, I guess, you know, I guess from thinking of it from that respect, I guess that area is not climate controlled and it is pretty open. So it might make sense to seal that off. But you're talking only 10 square feet, so that's not a big deal. Any other questions about anything? Or?
That's easy.
Okay, pretty straightforward.
So how many tuck pointing jobs do you typically do in a year?
Well, boy, I would say probably a dozen. Not quite to this size. You know, this isn't something that we typically do every day, but you know, as far as from a mason's standpoint and masonry work, it's pretty rudimentary. It's pretty easy to do. It's just paying attention to the details and you know, again, just making sure you're doing it the right way.
Which church did you do down in South?
Concordia. Now, and they chose to do more of a tuck point traditional, you know, where you're just kind of going over the cracks and kind of addressing the cracks and that sort of thing. There was some structural damage up on top of the towers that we repaired. But you know, as far as from a repointing and tuck pointing standpoint, there wasn't a whole lot of repointing. It was more just simple cosmetic tuck pointing.
Do you have any your own footage of that?
I don't. No, that was before I got into the drone.
Would you be interested in flying it again?
I wouldn't be opposed to it. Yeah.
Just, you know,
Yeah.
You'd have a finished job there to advertise.
Sure. Yeah, and see how it held up.
You said you thought this would take about 8 weeks to do the project?
Yeah, so the project as a whole would probably be 8 weeks. Yeah, so we think that we could do the towers in 4 to 6. You know, in a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks probably for the main building. You can get around the main building a lot quicker. It's a lot easier. It's a little more accessible than the towers.
And how many people would you staff it at?
So there would be 2 masons and a tender. The tender isn't a true tender because he's a mason as well. So there would really be 3 masons on site. So you'd have the master mason and 2 other masons. The idea would be to have, you know, a tower going at a time and then have them, you know, some of the guys on the ground and scaffold and also tending to the guy in the, you know, in the lift. I don't think it's conducive to have 2 lifts going at the same time, working on the towers at the same time. It just seems to be problematic. So we would tackle 1 tower at a time so we don't have too much area opened up at once. And there's a chance it could be less than 8 weeks, you know, I mean, that's
So in doing the towers, you just have one lift going at a time?
correct.
And then would you have two people in the basket, is it, or?
No, there'd be just one guy in a basket usually, yep. There's not enough room to be, you know, running a grinder, and by the time you have the HEPA vac, you know, everything has to be dustless now for OSHA regulations, so we have a HEPA vac up there and a dustless grinder, and it just isn't really conducive to have two guys in the basket. Any other questions?
Are these, I'm going to ask a question, are these your lifts?
No, these are rental lifts.
Okay, these are rentals.
Yeah.
all right.
Thing about lifts, especially when you get to that height, you know, the certification process and the insurance on them and everything else, it doesn't make sense to own those things.
So this is.
We have scaffolding, you know, our scaffolding would be our scaffolding, but the lifts would be rental lifts. And I would imagine that's probably going to be pretty consistent with what you'll find.
What are you figuring, 2 months there?
Yeah, so I'm figuring a month on a 120 and a month on an 80. So the idea is to get the taller sections done with the 120 and get rid of that thing. Yeah, because that thing is, you know, it's probably 40% higher cost than an 80, and then we can get everything else with an 80 pretty easily. There's just a couple spots I think we'll have to have that 120 to get into safely.
How high up do you scaffold?
Oh, probably we could go probably 3 rings. I would say 3 rings. Beyond that, I prefer probably to use a lift. By the time you spend the time and the effort and the man hours, you know, assembling the scaffold, once you get higher than that, unless you plan on being there a long time, it doesn't really justify.
What is the run for height?
So run basically gets you about 7 feet.
Oh, and you wouldn't fasten into the building?
No, you would not have to for that. All right, anything else, guys?
So the clock tower was the worst of the towers?
Yeah, I would say so. Both of them have significant damage, but the clock tower definitely, I would say, has more than
So
the
clock
south
would be
tower.
first, and then-
What's that?
So if you're gonna do different towers, which one would you do first?
We would start with the taller tower. We would start with the south tower. The idea is to get rid of the taller, more expensive lift, obviously. You can just see a lot of the patching, a lot of the different colors throughout where some of the new stuff is already failing. You know, from the ground, it didn't look that bad. I was pretty surprised when I flew the drone how much more damage was really up there. And of course, you guys can have this video saved on your thumb drive. Anything else?
Yeah, I've got one more thing.
Yeah.
That, there's a hole in the window.
There's a hole above the window on this window, the northeast main window. Above that, there's an auxiliary window up above. I'm going to call it an auxiliary window. It's a small window. It's got a hole, and starlings get in up there, and there's a starling pile by that window. Did you happen to see any of that?
You know, it's probably on there, but I didn't.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm just wondering, is it something that you can do something about at the point that you're working? And, you know, I understand it might be an adder or something. It's a
Sure.
surprise, but
Yeah, no, I don't see it being an issue. Like I said, most of it is logistics and getting up there. And
Right.
once you're up there, a lot of that stuff, and you have a lift, it's a lot easier,
Okay,
so. But yeah, I wouldn't see that being an issue to
yeah.
handle.
Well, yeah.
You're saying a hole through the actual glass itself,
What's that?
through the glass, or?
We think so.
Okay.
I have a picture of it.
Yeah. It's,
I'm sure it's on
Matt's
here,
got a
but
picture. Yeah.
either paying attention to more of the brick than I was the windows. Oh, yeah,
So the hole's there,
sure.
and this guy there
Oh, wow.
is piles and piles of dead birds. They get into the window,
And they can
and
get
they
out.
can't get out.
Yeah.
That's something you'd be able to fix.
Yeah, I'm sure we can.
Okay.
So this is a plexi.
Yeah, we could probably take, this is plexi?
Yeah, it's plexi in front of the,
Window.
right, that, to protect the stained
The stain?
glass, they put plexi around it.
It almost looks like the stained glass does, though.
The stained glass
Yeah.
is broke, right?
Yeah.
But remove the plexi.
So it's on the inside.
The glass, the stained glass itself is broke.
The stained
That's
glass
where
is
the hole is.
recessed, there's a
Yeah.
sheet of
So
plexiglass.
it's actually on the inside.
Correct.
Makes it a worse job. Yeah.
Right, so you'd have to remove the plexi, clean that all out, which I'm sure all that depth is not doing.
Or come in
all
from the
this.
church
No.
side.
No, certainly
That's
not.
all eaten at that.
Is there access from the church side? I've not been up in the upper
See.
tower.
To get over that, you have to, that's along the peak, and then you'd have to ladder up to it. Because
So that might be
that window up there.
Yeah, that might be a whole different job then. It might not have to do with, it might be not be germane to this job.
Well, that's why I'm thinking if he could remove the plexi, that safety barrier, we added that later.
Okay,
So if you can remove that plexi, I don't know what you do to this stained glass to patch it over. So nothing else gets in there and
put a
then
patch,
replace the
yeah,
plexi.
you have to attach a patch to it, right?
Yeah.
I don't think anyone's aware of it. It's not going to be an aesthetic issue, really.
But that was definitely.
Yeah,
Yeah,
mechanical.
for sure.
You
Yeah, above
you can see how it's.
The north side.
Yeah.
Yeah, on the north side, above this window,
It's just not sealed up very well.
there's a smaller window, a small stained glass window above it, and that's the one that's got a problem.
Yeah, it was on the screen when I
Okay.
asked and then.
Yeah, I never caught it. Never caught that.
And you guys wonder what we're talking about, if you want to see, I got a picture of it, if you want to see it. Want to see it? So, of this window is that smaller window. Okay? Here. Here's the hole. And the-
Oh, sure.
That window right there,
Yeah.
I just trying to cover it all.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's why we're here,
There's a
right?
whole bunch of wings and a whole bunch of,
Mhm.
and it's padded down over time, so this is all.
That's it, right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right there, right at the
Can you
bottom.
pause?
Take that plexiglass off, yeah.
See, I
What
think
we
got a
notice is
hard
it's
time
all
getting that
deteriorated and
inside.
eating that.
Yeah,
I've been up
yeah,
there.
you can't fix that from the inside.
It's,
But there is a caulking rim that goes around the whole thing.
Right.
We saw,
You can remove the plexi.
remove that and then patch that hole
Yeah.
and then clear it up.
Well, that's not something he anticipated, it'd be an matter, but it's there, we should fix it.
I don't know if we could take a template of that and have somebody make the pieces that would go back in there. I can look into that.
Yeah, there's a stained glass company in Winona. You're probably aware of it.
And we can take a template of it and see,
Yeah.
and you can decide whether you just want it patched or,
It's not aesthetic, it's more mechanical at this point.
Yeah.
You know.
yeah, I was paying attention to the brick. I never even, never caught the.
There's enough to pay attention to there.
So if we were going to divide the project into a couple of phases,
So putting it in phases.
if you were going to divide it up into a couple of phases, would you take care of the,
South tower, north tower, main building,
okay,
foundation last. That's how I would, if you were to, separate them out. Now, the only thing I will speak to that though is if we start separating towers, you're looking at, adding on an additional mobilization costs, if we separate those two, because, obviously you're talking, resetting up lifts and containment and barricades and, there's a lot of safety things we've got to, set up for. So there would be some mobilization charges in addition to if we separated those two. And they're not too far apart as far as, being a necessity, in my opinion. So I would try to avoid separating those two, but if you wanted to hold off on this, you could probably get away with it. I would even say that a guy could probably pressure wash and seal the main building, maybe buy yourself some years, but I wouldn't put it off too long because there's some things that definitely need attention already.
Is this clock tower in there?
Yeah,
That was a clock tower.
guess we could walk around with a can yelling, save the clock tower, save the clock tower.
Yeah.
Who's the movie buff? Who knows what movie that's from?
Be a big can.
Years ago when it didn't work to actually do that.
Yeah.
And then you pulled together. I'm not guaranteed that would happen.
Crowdfunding's pretty popular nowadays.
Yeah.
All right, anything else?
Cool. Oh, yeah.
In your proposal, you have, line items for pressure washing and sealing of the masonry. And both of those items are for the entire building?
Correct. I just don't think that you can get away with doing this project without pressure washing the building and sealing the building, period.
I'm just thinking about breaking it up into two phases, the towers and the rest of the main church. Would you be able to break those numbers
Sure.
between the two?
Yeah, sure.
And
But if you plan on breaking them up and having a prolonged period of time before you were to go into the phase 2 or phase 3 or however many phases you decide to break it down, the building probably should be pressure washed and sealed regardless. So that may be something you want to keep in there. If you just decide to do the towers, this part of the building should probably still be pressure washed and sealed to buy you some time.
could you break the painting out, the two between the two?
Sure. Yep.
Painting and carpet.
Could you, so what, if you were to break it down into phases, what would that look like? Are you still thinking doing the towers together? And
Towers
then,
are the main thing right now.
We plan to form a committee starting Monday,
okay,
and we will sit down and try to formulate what we want to do, and then we'll communicate back to you.
okay.
Would that be all right?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
We'll try to sit down and broker some of that out
Sure.
among ourselves, so we kind of know what, at this point, we really don't know what we're doing. We're still asking questions of our contractors.
Yep.
But after next week, we should know how we want that bid broken out, and we'll have questions about your lines, what we want specifically.
Sure.
We'll go through this stuff.
Yeah, that's not an issue. Yeah.
That'll make your job a little easier rather than have to do it twice.
Yeah. That works.
Cool.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you coming and showing us everything. And to those watching remotely, see ya. Thank you.